This video will explore the cigarettes smoked by soldiers from major countries involved in World War II and delve into the history and cultural insights behind them. The timing of when Japan and China were first exposed to modern cigarettes is relatively close. In 1869, Japanese merchant Yasugoro Tsuchida began producing cigarettes on a small scale in Tokyo. By 1880, certain American cigarettes started appearing in major cities across China. In 1883, Japan's first large-scale cigarette brand, Tengu, was launched, and by 1905, the British American Tobacco Company had established a factory in China, marking the gradual shift from traditional Chinese tobacco pipes to rolled cigarettes. Cigarettes soon became an integral part of military life in both countries. The Japanese military encouraged smoking among soldiers, seeing it as a way to relieve stress and boost morale. Popular brands such as Golden Bat and Hain could be purchased at half price in military stores, leading to a high smoking rate among Japanese veterans. Some smoked multiple packs daily. Many soldiers, especially those without family obligations, would spend their entire monthly allowance on cigarettes. In the Navy, the call to bring out your cigarette case signaled the end of a hard day's tasks, underscoring the significance of smoking in Japanese military culture. When the full-scale Sino-Japanese War erupted in 1937, Japanese demand for cigarettes surged. Relying on domestically produced cigarettes shipped overseas became impractical, so the Japanese military began sourcing tobacco locally in China. However, there were several incidents of poisoning linked to tobacco bought from small vendors, prompting Japanese authorities to consider establishing cigarette factories within China. The Japanese government had long recognized tobacco taxes as a significant revenue source, having implemented a special tax on tobacco as early as 1888. Thus, exploiting cigarette production in occupied areas became a natural extension of Japanese economic control. In April 1939, with backing from Japanese intelligence agencies in Beijing, Japanese entrepreneurs established the North China East Asia Tobacco Company in Beijing, forcibly purchasing Chinese tobacco, primarily from Shandong. This move drastically reduced the market share of British American tobacco to below 25%. By September 1940, Japanese tobacco companies, supported by the military, aggressively expanded within occupied territories, taking over Chinese-owned cigarette factories and opening 9 new companies that produced 14 billion cigarettes annually, while Chinese factories saw production drop below 1 billion. During the Pacific War, Japan also seized the North China British American Tobacco Company, securing a monopoly on cigarette production in the region. This allowed the Japanese government to collect over 25 million yen in tobacco tax annually from North China, with revenues reaching 304.77 million yen by 1943, of which 206.1 million yen came from cigarette taxes, accounting for 68.8% of the total. Additionally, Japanese military forces received over 1.8 billion cigarettes per year from Japanese-owned factories, ensuring that each soldier was supplied with about 20 cigarettes daily. Cigarette production thus became a crucial means for Japan to fund its war efforts economically and in terms of supplies. The most popular cigarette brands among Japanese soldiers on the Chinese front were produced by the North China East Asia Tobacco Company, including brands like Asahi, Kofuku, Fuji, and Akebano. Japanese cigarettes featured a unique stiff cardboard mouthpiece, which, although unfiltered, prevented tobacco from sticking to the lips, making smoking more convenient and elegant. These cigarettes not only appealed to Japanese soldiers, but also gained popularity among elite women in occupied areas. Following the outbreak of the Pacific War, Japan replicated this strategy in the South Seas, establishing Japanese-run cigarette factories in occupied territories. Cigarette brands such as Equator, Iko, and Aotori from Jakarta in Indonesia or Taiwan were available to Japanese soldiers, though many preferred familiar brands from home. Due to a prohibition on English-language brands, Golden Bat cigarettes, produced by Japan's Salt Monopoly Bureau, were rebranded as Golden Eagle to align with Japanese preferences. These cigarettes, found almost everywhere, became a valuable commodity for Japanese soldiers, offering them a comforting taste of home. In contrast, China's military lacked a formal cigarette distribution system. British American tobacco products like Hardman, Lao Dao, and Sampatai were expensive, and regular soldiers generally could not afford them before the war. The Sampatai brand, whose English name translates to Three Castles, gained popularity through a marketing strategy that linked the product to historical heroes from the Three Kingdoms period, similar to the collectible cards in 20th century American kid snacks. This branding made Sampatai especially popular among warlords and nationalist officers. Most ordinary Chinese soldiers resorted to smoking dry or hand-rolled tobacco, though there was an exception: the Pegasus brand cigarette, produced by the new Fourth Army's Huainan military region. Initially, this cigarette was made solely to meet the needs of soldiers, with a daily production capacity of about 800 packs. However, it became unexpectedly popular on the market, and merchants would risk their lives to cross battle lines just to secure a few boxes. The Pegasus brand not only met the tobacco needs of the new Fourth Army, but also provided funding for the forces. More importantly, it marked a minor victory in the occupied areas, boosting morale. As the cigarette industry moved inland, the nationalist government issued temporary wartime tobacco regulations in 1942, aiming to regulate cigarette production, sales, and taxes to help offset rising military costs. By then, American-style tobacco was widely cultivated in Yunnan, and Chongqing and Yunnan-produced cigarettes became prevalent in the nationalist army. Chinese cigarette brands during this period often reflected a strong anti-Japanese sentiment, with notable examples like Expedition Army, produced by the China Spirit Cigarette Company, and brands like 77 and 99 produced by the Yunnan Cigarette Factory. However, without a formal cigarette rationing system, Chinese soldiers had to purchase cigarettes themselves or rely on civilian donations, resulting in a wide variety of available brands. Even in elite units stationed in India, only officers received cigarette rations, while soldiers had to procure their own. Many found that buying cigarettes from the U.S. 5,307th Unit was a good option, with American brands like Old Gold, Lucky Strike, and Camel available for purchase with rupees. When it comes to the British and American armies, many people imagine they have an endless supply of cigarettes. For Americans, this may not be surprising, but cigarettes were much scarcer for British soldiers. Britain didn't produce tobacco domestically, and most of its tobacco had to be transported from overseas colonies. Loose tobacco, while available, wasn't ideal for long storage during shipping. As a result, British soldiers often turned to cigars, pipes, chewing tobacco, or even snuff, which were considered more masculine and thus preferred over rolled cigarettes. However, as German U-boats increased their attacks, Britain's supply chain became tighter. This led Britain to start importing roasted tobacco from the United States, and soon, cigarettes began replacing pipes and cigars among British soldiers. Craven A, a brand founded in 1921 by the Carreras Tobacco Company, became a favorite among British soldiers during World War II. Even Charles de Gaulle, the exiled French general in London, adopted Craven A as his go-to cigarette due to the difficulty in obtaining French brands, eventually becoming a dedicated fan. Interestingly, the French Army had introduced a specially issued cigarette brand called Gauloise in 1935, designed to replace loose tobacco. Unlike the British, who used civilian-style packaging, the French wrapped Gauloise in brown paper printed with an Adrian helmet to market as an official military issue. However, after France's early surrender, the large stockpile of Gauloise was taken over by the German army. Throughout World War II, British cigarette factories faced a severe tobacco shortage. Combined annual production from several brands couldn't reach 2 billion cigarettes, which wasn't even enough to meet the Army's needs, let alone civilian demand. Veteran London smokers recalled that the only available cigarettes were poor-quality Spanish mantle brands, filled with all kinds of miscellaneous leaves. They reportedly burned with a terrible odor, likened to the smell of rotting wood, so much so that the smoke could drive people out of theaters. The United States was the only nation during World War II that could supply cigarettes to soldiers in abundance. Although the U.S. had been a major tobacco producer before World War I, the war popularized cigarettes among average Americans. Cigarette production rose from 14 billion in 1914 to 47 billion by 1918, and consumption per person jumped from 141 cigarettes in 1911 to 1,892 by 1941, largely consumed by frontline soldiers. President Roosevelt even declared tobacco an essential crop, asking the draft board to delay the enlistment of tobacco workers if possible, highlighting cigarettes' importance to the military and government. The U.S. military had a variety of cigarette packaging types to suit different roles and rations. Military cigarettes came in packs of 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, or 10. Pilots and drivers typically received the 2-pack to carry easily. 3-packs went into C-ration supplement tins, while 4 and 5-packs were included in care ration boxes. 9-packs were issued alongside C-rations as a post-meal treat for squads, and 10-packs were distributed for individual weekly ration quotas or were donated by charity organizations. With an abundance of brands in the U.S. military, the range of cigarettes was dizzying. Standard rations included brands like Old Gold, Chelsea, Philip Morris, Raleigh, and Chesterfield. The most famous brands in full-sized packs were Lucky Strike and Camel. In 1942, Lucky Strike announced a switch from green to white packaging, claiming it was to save copper in green dye for the war effort, though they primarily used chromium. This made Lucky Strike a symbol of patriotism and boosted its popularity among U.S. soldiers. A superstition grew among troops to carry one Lucky Strike cigarette upside down as a lucky cigarette, which was never smoked. However, the most popular brand among charity organizations supporting the troops was Camel. Manufactured by R.J. Reynolds, Camel had a richer flavor, and the American Red Cross, along with other charities and local governments, bought large amounts to donate to the front lines. By 1944, Camel's production had doubled, with 50% going to the military. The U.S. Army even requested an additional 150 million Camel cigarettes per week for the front lines. Nearly every military post-exchange offered Camel cigarettes. After the Normandy invasion, Camel cigarettes spread across France, with the American soldiers introducing the French, used to dark tobacco, to golden tobacco for the first time. Over time, American cigarettes became hard currency among U.S. soldiers, who could exchange them for goods across Germany, Italy, and France. They even became stable currency in local markets. The significance of cigarettes to U.S. soldiers was so deep that in 1945, the Army named its post-war veteran camps after cigarette brands, reminding soldiers that a promising life awaited them after the war. As Allied forces on the Western Front were puffing away on their cigarettes, what kind of smoke were their Eastern Front allies, the Soviet soldiers, inhaling? In 1941, when the war had just broken out, Soviet soldiers' rations didn't include any tobacco due to health concerns. However, by September 21st, the brutal battles on the front lines forced the Defense Committee to issue an order. Each soldier in combat units would receive 20 grams of macorka per day. Macorka, a type of rough, shredded leaf tobacco made from yellow tobacco plants, had a sharp, spicy taste and a strong kick. Prolonged use severely damaged the respiratory system and lungs, but at the onset of war, this was the only tobacco available to Soviet soldiers. For these troops, tobacco was considered a strategic resource, almost as essential as ammunition. It held a high priority in supply chains, even more than food. However, within the first year of fighting the German army, Soviet stockpiles of tobacco and cigarettes were nearly exhausted. Soldiers soon had to use anything they could find: leaves, pine needles, paper scraps. to make makeshift cigarettes and alleviate the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion of battle. Meanwhile, civilians and reservists at home had even less access to tobacco. Just 50 grams of makorka surged to a price of 400 rubles, yet it was still hard to come by. By mid-1942, the shortage for frontline troops finally began to ease. With the help of the Lend-Lease Act, American and British cigarettes reached Soviet soldiers, introducing them to Western brands. Meanwhile, the Soviet cigarette industry grew rapidly, and by the later years of the war, Soviet soldiers could smoke rolled cigarettes from brands like Red Star, Kazbek, and Lviv, along with makorka hand-rolled in Pravda newspaper. Among soldiers, there was even a saying, if Kazbek smoke drifted from an officer's bunker, then everything was going well. German soldiers also faced challenges with cigarette supply, due in large part to Nazi Germany's extensive anti-smoking campaign that started in 1933. Hitler saw smoking as a morally corrupt habit and a curse brought by Native Americans to harm Europeans, one he believed threatened Germany's superior breeding policies. He promised to ban smoking in the military after the war. Under these political restrictions, Wehrmacht cigarettes were rationed, with soldiers limited to a maximum of 6 cigarettes per day. Most German tobacco was imported, and as the war intensified, the supply of American tobacco was cut off. Germany then turned to Turkey, a longtime trading partner, to import tobacco. German military cigarettes like R6 and Attica used Turkish tobacco, whose pungent aroma led American soldiers to mockingly call them horse manure knockoffs, while Soviet soldiers said they smelled like ink. In the later stages of the war, the German army slightly increased soldiers' tobacco rations, but there was still a strict monthly cap of 500 cigarettes per person. Female personnel in support roles were completely prohibited from smoking. By 1944, even though the number of smokers had increased, average consumption per soldier had fallen by 23.4% compared to pre-war levels. Only 0.3% of German soldiers smoked up to 30 cigarettes per day, with an average annual consumption of just 743 cigarettes. In contrast, American soldiers consumed an average of 3,039 cigarettes annually. Additionally, the U.S. exempted military cigarettes from taxes, while Germany imposed heavy taxes of over 95% on all military tobacco. With the defeat of Nazi Germany, American cigarettes quickly gained popularity in Germany. In 1954, as part of the Marshall Plan, the U.S. distributed free cigarettes across Germany, causing per capita tobacco consumption to skyrocket to 1,523 cigarettes annually. Unsurprisingly, American cigarette companies profited immensely. In the 1980s, as studies increasingly confirmed the link between smoking and lung cancer, militaries worldwide stopped issuing cigarettes to soldiers. But during the intense, grueling conflict of World War II, cigarettes were often a soldier's closest comfort. For smokers, they provided a break from the mental and physical strain of war, and for non-smokers, they served as a tradable commodity. Amid the smoke, cigarettes became a symbol, evoking memories of the fragile beauty of peacetime. That's the end of today's video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.